Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. Matthew isn't here this week as he traverses my home territory. Though he might make a surprise appearance, hopefully, maybe, down the line. But I am joined by his roommate and our good friend, Mr. Dominic Jones. So, hello, Dominic.
Hello, Joel. Yeah, I'm here to show the regular viewers that there is actually a top half to this set. I know you're used to seeing it only to about here, but it actually keeps going. There's more to it than that. Um, just start the show with the cheap shots at Matthew. I think is how we should do this. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. This wasn't planned that I'd be here for the Andor 2 trailer, but I'm excited that I am because that's a great trailer for a great show. And I'm very excited to look ahead at season 2 with you.
Yeah, this is actually a perfect time for the trailer to come, because in the next couple of weeks, slight spoilers for what we have planned, hopefully, if all goes right. We have a regular episode next week, which is me and Matthew doing another topic. And then hopefully the week after that, we're going to have a big book panel for Mask of Fear. And if the trailer had come that day, we would have done it, but I would have rushed through it because when you have 4 people, hopefully, on a panel, you want to get it through quickly so you're not here for 3 hours talking about the book. But I'm glad we're all here anyway. So yes, this week we're going to be doing a very special, just a kind of a grand, glorified week in Star Wars discussion with me and Dominic here. So that'll be fun. I don't think there's a tractor beam this week. I think Matthew will be out again. So, unfortunately, we're gonna have to hold off on that. I think there will be one week after next with some fun ones. I know one of them is gonna be the Rise of Skywalker comic, which we've been waiting for a couple of years now. That was delayed for quite a bit, I believe, and some other.
That's baffling to me. That is still one of the most baffling things that happened. Like I get it was
I know.
paused in 2020 because of COVID and shipping and all that stuff. Like I get that.
Yeah.
It's like 5 years later and they're just getting around to they just sat on it for 5 years. It's very odd. But
It's odd.
for the completionists, I'm glad they're doing it.
Oh no, I'm glad too. It is odd. Matthew has talked about maybe Joby Hauser's had some health problems, and they don't want to get into that, so maybe that's why. I mean, if she had, well, I hope she's okay. 'Cause I love her work; she's great. I mean, if they don't want to say anything, I mean, I guess her privacy, man. But yeah, it is odd that they've held on to this for 5 years, and they've only now started to get into this. So yeah, I don't understand it either. But yeah, you can of course follow us on the Blue Sky. And of course, follow us on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. This week for Star Wars Underworld Discord, we're gonna do a movie night again. Last movie night we did Princess Mononoke, and this week we are doing Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, the
Nice.
only theatrical animated Batman movie starring Kevin Conroy as Batman and the Joker, played by Mark Hamill.
For for a second, I know Kevin Conroy has played Batman for many years before he passed away, and I know he's a very iconic one. But for some reason, my brain autocorrected as you were talking, and you're like starring Kevin Costner as Batman, and I was like, oh, I hadn't heard about this. That should be interesting.
No, I don't think there
Field
is
of Dreams guy to play Batman.
He would have been an interesting Batman, maybe. I don't know. Yellowstone guy. Yeah. Nope, it's just good old Kevin and Mark doing their thing. So be on the lookout for that. I've been trying to do a lot more movie nights on the SW and kind of have a broad range of movies as part of my agenda to make Ben watch movies he's never seen before. And
Good.
myself sometimes.
Good. Ben needs to watch more movies. He hasn't seen enough.
Yes. You hear that, Ben? I'm gonna make you watch more movies. That's easier to do than TV shows. Sorry, my cat is being silly. Silly cat. So yep, just be on the lookout for that. And I think that's it for plugs. So let's just get into it. And door. One way out. One day out. One day out. Yes. After a long delay and kind of wondering where the heck is the trailer? The trailer's here, and it's pretty epic. A lot of people have brought up I'll just talk with my my overall thoughts. A lot of people brought up the kind of the tonal difference between season 1 and 2. Um, obviously, you have, like, an actual rock song in it.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. So I think there's a couple reasons for this. I think the first one is kind of cynical. I think it's kind of we want to get more normies to watch the show. You're like, hey, there's action, there's adventure, a little bit more faster pace. Um, my second thought, though, and this is where I'm more trusting of it, is I think it makes sense because I think we're kind of in this between Rogue One and Andor season 1 was over here. This is sort of like the middle ground. So now we're gonna have more. It is gonna be a little more faster. Andor's getting more involved in the rebellion. We're getting closer to that Rogue One of it all. Um. So, oh, yeah, I'm coming through still.
Mhm, mhm.
Getting closer to the Rogue One of it all. So I think that it's a lot more kind of like maybe it's kind of speeding up because it has to speed up because like I think of it as like an airplane railway, and then Rogue One is like the big whoosh moment. And if you consider Andor season 1, season 2, and Rogue One almost like a complete sort of picture,
Yeah.
I see this as almost like, okay, we kind of did the slow build for season 1. Now we're speeding up, speeding up, speeding up, and then Rogue One. But yeah, I
Yeah.
overall loved it. So, what do you think of this trailer?
Yeah, I think seasons 1 and 2 of Andor plus Rogue One is sort of the Cassian Andor trilogy. I think is one way
Right.
of looking at it. Like at that, I think you just laid it out like that. But yeah, I agree. I think the trailer is really cool. It's different in tone for Star Wars, and it feels very modern and it feels very confident for Star Wars. And I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of swagger going into Andor season 2 because of how well received season 1 was.
Right.
It may not have been sort of the cultural phenomenon that the Mandalorian was,
Mhm.
but it was sort of it's the best reviewed Star Wars thing.
Mhm.
It may not have like the highest Rotten Tomatoes count, but it's the one that is it's not treated as a Star War. It's
Right.
treated as a prestige drama. And that's why they use all those quotes in the trailer. They're like, you know, if you didn't dig the like deep lore-ness of
Mhm.
Acolyte or the Goonies kitty vibe of Skeleton Crew wasn't for you. If you want quote unquote Star Wars for adults, you want something that feels like it would be on HBO or Apple TV, something that would be more in line with The Last of Us or Severance or
Mhm.
things like that. This is that show. This is that show. It was that show in season 1, and it's going to continue to be that show in season 2. And it came in with a lot of swagger. It came in with a lot of confidence. It felt very modern, which is something that Star Wars trailers don't usually feel modern. They
Right.
usually feel like throwbacks. They usually play to nostalgia in a way that this one just wasn't. Think about a lot of the trailers that we've got in the last few years and the last decade. Let's go back a decade to Force Awakens because we can do that now.
Yeah.
Like those,
Roll.
tra- yeah, yeah, those trailers, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of the Force theme. There's a lot of Duel of the Fates.
Mhm.
There's the Rebel fanfare. There's the Star Wars theme. There's really sort of iconic John Williams music. Or there's stuff that's meant to evoke it. Like I was looking back at the Acolyte trailer. I don't think there's actual like Star Wars familiar music. I think it's original stuff in there, but it's meant to evoke sort of the same John Williamsy feel. And it's familiar, it's safe. You look at it and go,
Mhm.
"Oh yeah, Star Wars, right? Yeah, yeah. We know this." Skeleton Crew strayed from that a little bit, but it still was hitting the nostalgia button hard. Too hard, I would argue. I think they went too far in the way they marketed that, where they were almost only marketing it to adults and not to the younger audience that might appreciate it, that might
Mhm.
get in on it. Like the fact that they were playing it like it was a VHS trailer. I'm like, come on, come on. Joel, you and me, we're the last generation that appreciates that.
It's
And
true.
we're not that old, but the kids that are younger than us, the people that are younger than us, they don't know what that is. The ones that you need to get hooked on Star Wars,
Mhm.
uh, they're not gonna appreciate that. They might appreciate the show because the show's a lot of fun, and the show
Mhm.
is hitting the nostalgia button hard on the 80s stuff, but the 80s stuff is fun and good too, and would resonate with a modern audience, as we saw with Stranger Things, if you treat it as a modern thing, but with those harkenings back.
Parking.
This one is like, this feels like we said, modern Star Wars. It looks cool. It feels cool. It's sharp. It feels like it's saying something. Like, that music, man, that's a choice. That
Mhm.
is a choice.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and you're watching it, and you don't immediately if you don't know that it's Andor, you maybe don't immediately sense that it's Star Wars, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, stormtroopers, X-wings. This is Star Wars. Hey, Forrest Whitaker's in this, and Ben Mendelsohn. Weren't they in that the best of the new Star Wars movies, as a lot of people say?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, all of a sudden, then it like catches you, and like you're like, oh right, this is Star Wars. This is part of that, but it feels fresh. It feels exciting. Feels a little dangerous. And I think that Star Wars needs that right now. Love the Mandalorian, but it went from feeling that way in season 1, feeling kind of cool and dangerous, to hitting the nostalgia buttons pretty hard in season 3.
Mhm.
And I'm super stoked for Mandalorian and Grogu, but sometimes I wonder if it might go back to those same familiar wells. I hope it tonally maybe returns to season 1 while keeping the connections to the larger universe of season 3. Is
Well, we know that there's gonna be some nostalgia because Road of the Hut, unless you don't consider. I mean, Road of the Hut's nostalgic for some of us here.
yeah, exactly.
It's a more of a weird nostalgia with Rhoda because like he's nostalgic for us because it's Clone
Yeah.
Wars fan. It's like not like Joe Blow knows who Road of the Hut is.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and so like as we look ahead to like future Star Wars things and these, and how you do the trailers,
yeah,
especially as you start getting to things like starting to get into things like the Mangold movie, or
yeah,
the Ryan Gosling movie. That's where you can maybe like, go back to this sort of tone,
right.
this sort of feeling, in a way that maybe for the Ray movie or the Mando movie, you kind of think like, all right, let's get some Johnny Williams in here, and have a little fun going down memory lane. But I honestly, like, when I saw this trailer and I heard the music in it, it took me back to the Game of Thrones season 5 trailer. Like, that's what I would compare it to, where they used the Bowie song. I think it's
Huh.
Bowie.
Mm.
If I were, I would be king. Just, we could be
That'd be
heroes just for one day. Like, they were using that in that trailer, and it was like this. It was like a kind of a cool, different take on
mhm.
that epic universe, and this using the song that they used. Didn't texted me who it actually is, but I can't remember. I'll have to go into my text messages. Um, but it's a good
Mm.
fun, like, it feels good, it feels right, and the trailer itself, the imagery is strong to
Oh
go
yeah.
with it.
Yeah, one thing that I wonder about Andor is how indicative it's gonna be of kind of future projects. Because I think the one thing to always keep in mind, and I talked about this with some friends when we were chatting about the trailer. Um, Someone brought up, it's like, it's important to remember Andor and a little bit of Ahsoka season 2 are kind of the last vestiges of the old just give everybody streaming shows because we need the content money. Here, Tony Gilroy, take the money and run. And he did.
Mhm.
And so did Leslie Headland, too. She at least got one season out of it. So I am kind of curious to see if Andor is indicative of anything moving forward, or if it's kind of just the last of something. And then we don't really know until maybe you could say Ahsoka season 2. I would even argue we don't know until they announce whatever is after Ahsoka in terms of live action
Mhm.
streaming. Um, oh, and Matthew said he might pop in. Oh, few minutes, but he's gonna get some barbecue. So nice.
This isn't
So
this isn't the Intergalactic Peace Coalition. We don't do BBQ watch here. Come
I
on,
know,
Matthew.
but what do you think, Dominic, in terms of that kind of where Andor stands in terms of like reading the tea leaves?
Well, this is what's sort of interesting
Mhm,
is
mhm,
I think I think Lucasfilm wants to do lots of different things. I think the people who are most directly responsible for making Star Wars want to do interesting things, and they want to do a variety of things. They want to have
mhm,
something like Ahsoka or Acolyte that's very tied in with the lore. They want to have something like Skeleton Crew that's
mhm,
more. family friendly, more, or not even family friendly, but just like family oriented.
And I appreciate that personally, like
Yeah,
that sort of all
absolutely.
around it.
And then they want to have something like Andor that is, the show they can put up for Emmys or big prestigious awards and get lots of buzz about, and have Star Wars not only be successful at the box office, but be sort of successful critically and have that clout of it's not just another franchise. They're doing interesting things over
This is
there.
art.
Yeah, and it can be art. And so I think that was the intention for the streaming shows.
Mhm.
And I think it was the intention for the movies too.
Mhm.
You look at the first 4 Star Wars movies produced under Disney, and
Mhm.
I think you get that sense. With Force Awakens being kind of the celebration of the legacy, Rogue One continuing that celebration of the legacy, but moving into that kind of edgier territory. Last Jedi being like, oh, we're going to do something completely different with these characters. And Solo being like, oh, we're going to do like a fun romp that hopefully everybody can get on board with. The only movie that I think was really produced with the audience reaction in mind was Rise of Skywalker. And I think for me, that movie had too much of the audience in mind, audience reaction in mind, and they were almost like afraid to do anything because they were constantly thinking about, oh, what will people think of this? What will people think of that? And so they played it safer than they did with the other ones. But because those first 4 movies were largely conceived of and produced in the same time frame, and they were, Solo was done more or less by the time Last Jedi is in theaters, right? Like
Mhm.
it's they're doing the VFX and some editing still, but that movie's pretty much done by the time there's any sort of backlash. So I think that's the intention. And I think you look at the movies that are coming down the pipe, right? Like you have the Mando Grogu movie, and we'll lump sort of the Filoni movie in there as well as an effort to do kind of a big event thing. Hey, look who it
Hey!
is.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back.
We're just
Hey!
saying,
Yeah.
you can do BBQ Watch on the
Yes.
Intergalactic Peace Coalition podcast, but you don't do it here.
Okay, I can do it on my my own foodie Instagram. I can do it there too. There we go. Tell me hello, everyone from Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah, I'm in town for a church conference, but yeah,
Ooh,
that's why
Missouri.
Dom's in the studio. And Joel's doing his thing. How's it going, guys?
I kept thinking like,
Good.
oh, I'm doing Ion Canon. I need to set up in the kitchen.
Right.
And then I'm like, all right, no, I
Well,
don't
let's
have
make
to.
this official. Let's make this official.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm just popping in for a few minutes. I
But
actually got to go get some barbecue in a
okay,
few
well,
minutes. That's the
Matthew, just
plan.
could you give us your well, give us your sense on the trailer. What you think? Trailer,
Yeah.
Angel.
Honestly, my first thought is Disney. We're waiting on Disney. We're waiting on Star Wars. We're waiting on even Marvel or whoever to finally give us some sort of real statement on the state of affairs today in our world today, especially in this country here that I happen to be in right now. And of course, all the story was in development years ago, probably during the first Trump administration. Uh, it's going to be interesting how far they go with this. Obviously, again, it's all locked in. Captain America 4, if you're looking, this is a bit of a spoiler, if you're looking for him to make a radical statement, it doesn't really. So I wonder if this one will. It kind of has to, because we know what Cassian's direction is. We know that he's kind of a bit in the Saw Gerrera mold, a little bit in that direction as well. So maybe not fully. He's definitely more part of the in Rogue One we see him more as part of the mainstream of the Rebel Alliance, but on the dirtier side of it. So I mean, it's interesting seeing this having about 2/3 of Mask of Fear in my head. I was reading it on the plane today, and just the way it already starts to set up the distinction between Mon Mothma, Bail, and Saw, and having that in my mind, thinking where does Andor fit? And this trailer reminds me. It just with music, using that song, it sounds more radical, more punchy. It reminds me of this is probably going to make a statement of some sort. Is this going to be the moment? Is it going to be the statement? I don't know. Again, we don't know how far Disney is willing to go. We don't know how far Lucasfilm is willing to go. But
Or
again,
Tony Gilroy himself, to quite frankly.
or Tony Gilroy himself. But given where the character ends up going, we know his story and where season 1 went. I wouldn't be surprised if it says something. It goes further than we expected. Even seeing Krennic, there, I think he's going to be. I think it's going to be Krennic in his prime. He's going to be the smug, really self-assured villain that we know he can be. We kind of saw in Catalyst, if you read that novel.
Love
This,
that novel.
yeah, and so this might be closer to that as opposed to the sniveling, going to Vader, going to Tarkin and everything. So that, we have that. Oh, it was a great party kind of with the Death Star. So that, and then Mon Mothma, mother, she's dancing at probably her daughter's wedding, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, all in all, really exciting. Really has the vibes of a strong, anti-authoritarian statement that we've hopefully been longing for. That raises the stakes, huge hype for the show. See what kind of pushback it gets as well. So yeah, I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts as well.
Yeah, I guess since they're both here, before we lose you, Matthew, I'm curious as well to get your thoughts on the release schedule. We will be getting 3 episodes a week. Apparently, this was Gilroy's decision because in every 3 episodes is a chapter. So basically, we're getting the arcs in full this time.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that?
It's how we watch Clone Wars. It's how you're supposed to watch Clone Wars, right? Ideally, is you sit down, you watch this movie. We're going to sit down every week and get this movie. We don't know how long is an episode. It's even odd that I guess kind of conceiving them as episodes. That probably will have kind of beginning, middle, end each episode. But then, it's just this fascinating structural conception of these aren't really episodes. They're full arcs. It's almost then closer to what you get with, say, Sherlock or Doctor Who, or I think Doctor Who does that. Dominic can let me know, correct me, but like or maybe closer to Sherlock, I think.
Sherlock.
With the longer films. It's just wild that they're just. And the last point is it's sort of this middle ground between the weekly release and say what happened with Echo. Speaking of, actually, that's the thing. Speaking of a radical statement from Marvel, Echo, which all 5 episodes all at once, does not get the attention that it deserves, and so the in the indigenous community in Oklahoma, right? I believe it's Oklahoma, and so this one maybe this middle ground where we get a full chunk, not just the 2 episodes that they usually do, but a full chunk of story right off the bat, full chunk of story each week. I'm excited for it. I think it could be the best of both worlds in that way.
Yeah. I'll say in terms of radical statement, I got more faith in that only because I didn't see Cap 4, but I know Cap 4 had like a hell of a production problem. So that movie, it seems like Andor was pretty smooth sailing, so it didn't seem like there was a lot of tomfoolery going on compared to Cap 4, which seems like was a mess. So there's that. And in terms of the release schedule, I'll just say I feel like when it comes to streaming, my hot take is I kind of wish all streaming shows could just be released depending on how their creatives want it, right? If Mando wants to be episodic, it can be episodic. If Kenobi and Acolyte maybe need to be binged and dropped all at once, maybe that should be. Maybe Kenobi should have been a movie. Skeleton Crew, I don't know. But I think that instead of trying to do this one size fits all of either binge or weekly, I don't know if you need a weird schedule where it's 2 episodes and then 1 and then 3, do that.
The flexibility of it, yeah.
That's my hot take, right? Maybe it's just a better viewing experience. Dominic, what are your thoughts on the release schedule?
So Andor season 1, sometimes the episodes would just end, right? In the middle of the arcs. There wasn't like a cliffhanger. There wasn't like a big sort of wow, tune in next week to find out what happens next kind of vibe to them, which is a criticism that gets lobbied against a lot of streaming shows, especially the ones that are released all at once, which is episodes just sort of end because they expect you to roll into the next one. This seems like it allows for the show to be 12 episodes, but it also allows for every episode to end, or every week, we won't say every episode, every week to end with some sort of wow moment, because that's the thing that season 1 did so well. Is you watch those first 3 episodes and you go, yeah, pretty cool show, good things are happening, I like it, I'm interested. Then you get into the Aldani arc, and the Aldani arc is a little bit of a slow burn. But you get to that last episode and you see the Eye of Aldani and that the whole escape and heist sequence, and you're like, wow, nothing will ever top this. This was incredible. What could they possibly do next that's better than this? And then you get the Narkina 5 episodes, and you get the One Way Out revolution, and it somehow tops it while being completely different. And then the finale is its own little animal in what it serves to do. So I think this allows for them to maintain that 3-act structure, those 3-episode arcs that they want to do, while also keeping the wow factor at the end of the episode, where you go, oh my God, I have to tune in next week, which is a kind of lost art again in the streaming age. Shows people are sort of expected just to tune in next week, sometimes without that big a cliffhanger. And it's been I've been watching that Hulu show Paradise with Sterling K. Brown in it, and that show is released weekly. It feels a little bit more like a throwback to a network style show, but every episode ends with a cliffhanger where you're like, oh, I need to tune in again to find out. And it's like, I've been a bit behind on it. I just got caught up, but like even when I get to the end of those episodes, like, oh phew, I don't have to wait a week until the next one. And that's sort of where I'm at now, where I just got caught up. The new episode comes out tomorrow. I'm like, phew, I don't have to wait that long. But that's gonna be a long ass week between the tomorrow's episode and the finale, because it's sort of like hooked me in that way. And so I think Gilroy's smart to say, you know what, let's do it this way. Let me maintain the integrity of my story and how I wanted to tell it within using these episodes. But I also understand that people want to be wowed by a Star Wars show. And I think this is, maybe, we've been talking a lot in the last year or so about the transition away from streaming back to movies. Maybe this is kind of like part of that. Like, this is a little bit of like, we made 12 episodes, and at a different time we would have released them over 12 weeks or 10 weeks or something like that. But we're not really, this isn't what we're selling our streaming service on anymore. So let's just release it in the most exciting, most visceral way that will keep people hooked for the 4 weeks that they're going to be there.
Yeah, Matthew brought up Echo. I mean, that's Marvel. That's why Marvel does some weird stuff with their streaming shows too. Although they didn't do it with Agatha, where it's like Echo is like, we got this thing, we made it during the big gold rush, but we're kind of moving on. So here you go. Agatha is like, Halloween. Let's go for a couple weeks of Halloween, and then it's sort of like, we just need to get to Daredevil. We want to get to Daredevil. That's what matters. Daredevil. Even Cap 4 right now kind of feels like just get it over with. We've had this for years. We're going to Fantastic Four. That's what matters. Plow through. So yeah, maybe I agree with Dominic. It might be. I'll be curious though to see again, as we were kind of talking about earlier, if this is indicative of what they're doing moving forward, like with Ahsoka season 2, or if Ahsoka season 2 will just be weekly again, but maybe Filoni structuring it that way. I don't know.
I want to jump in one last comment before I get some barbecue. I mean, the thing is with the streaming, with this release order, we only get it once. And then we can watch it however much we want. So it's this weird sort of first impression of the show. And that's a factor too, like playing into the first impressions. That's kind of to my point with Echo. If it had been released, and we say this all the time, right? If a weekly release means we're talking about it every week, you guys are devoting a whole episode every week to it. We did with Acolyte too, right? And generating that buzz. I mean, of course, if it's a film, you're going to still draw it out, but it's just a different kind of first impression. And so this is a third kind of first impression. It'll be fascinating. It's kind of uncharted territory. So I'm going to get some dinner.
All right. Thank you.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw! Yeah. Oh.
Well, yeah. Just on the Ahsoka question, like, how would Ahsoka be released? I hope Filoni looked at Andor and said, oh, I want to do that. Because the Clone Wars format.
Mhm.
He kind of, him and George worked and finessed and perfected that over many years.
Mhm.
And I would like to see him return to it because he's kind of gone away from it in the stuff he's done since then, including Rebels, but most sort of noticeably on with Ahsoka and Mandalorian. And so I'd like to see him sort of go, okay, maybe they're not going to give me the money to do 12 episodes. So I can't do 4 arcs, but what if I did 2 trilogies and a duology with Ahsoka
That
and
would
kind of spaced it out like that, where, if we just look at the season 2 of Ahsoka, like the first 3 episodes are like, investigating Mortis or something. And then the next 3 episodes, at the end of it, they escape back to the regular galaxy. And then the next 3 episodes are like Thrawn's first real threat. And then the last 2 episodes are sort of bringing together the coalition or something like, like just,
yeah.
I'm just sort of styling it out in one way. And then you could do something like that and make it, an event.
Well, what's interesting though, at least for me, maybe you disagree, and maybe if you
Mhm.
rewatch it, if you ever have time to rewatch it, maybe you can look at it through this. I kind of see Ahsoka as 2 arcs. I see episodes 1 through
Mhm.
4 as an arc, and then 5 through 8 as an arc, and that's perfect divide. It's like, one half is trying to get to Peridia, and the other half is on Peridia and getting thrown out. That's how I always view it. And it's funny with Mandalorian, as episodic as the episodes are, there
Mhm.
are arcs. I do think there are like 1 through 3, episodes 1, 2, and 3. That's an arc in a
Yeah.
weird way, right? He gets the mission, he gets the baby, he kind of has a little bit of adventure with the baby, and he goes back, and then it's like, oh shoot, I got to take care of the baby
Yeah.
now. 4 is very much a standalone. 5 and 6 are kind of, I don't want to call them filler, but they're kind of adventures of the
The
week
standalones. Yeah.
standalones, and then the finale, the 2-parter. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's kind of an arc in sort of both, but in a very
Oh yeah.
episodic way. And season 2 has a little bit of that as well. Season 3 kind of
See,
loses it.
season 2, I think of Mandalorian does the best job
Mhm.
of doing an adventure of the week,
Mhm.
but making sure that each one builds on the previous one
Oh, I agree.
in a satisfying way to the finale. Like you're right,
Mhm.
season 1 is 2 arcs and 3 standalones. That's the
Yeah,
season.
more or less.
Season 2, you can look at it either as 8 standalones or an
Mhm.
8-part arc.
Yeah.
Season 3 is sort of a mishmash of that
Confusing.
and not particularly satisfying in any way.
I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
So it kind of maybe that show would benefit from it as well. And I think
Mhm.
I'm excited for Mando to become a movie because I think focusing it will make it better and make it
Me too.
more, it will come into its own and actually live up to the potential that we see in it and that it showed in seasons 1 and 2. um but I think Matthew comparing it to Sherlock, I think was a good comparison because
Mhm.
again, I think like that's the way forward for Star Wars on Disney Plus. It's going to be these like limited short events.
Mhm.
And I don't know of how much you watched Sherlock when it was on, Joel, if you've watched it at all.
I liked the first season, and I watched a little bit of season 2, and then I kind of chopped off after
Yeah,
season
yeah.
3.
So the first when that show was on,
Mhm.
those 3 weeks that it was on was like truly like an event.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it was like people looked forward to it, and it was every couple of years. Like it wasn't regular.
Mhm.
And so people were really looking forward to it, and it truly became this like for a week, or sometimes they would do all the episodes in 10 days sort of thing, and it would be this sort of like cultural moment for people who were invested in that and following along with the main pop with the pop culture.
Mhm.
So I think that's sort of the way forward, and
Mhm.
a way to do that is to make it short and sweet. 4 weeks, boom, you're done. In, out, wham, bam, thank you, Pam. Like, it's great.
Right.
And I think that's kind of how they should do it, because obviously Disney wasn't seeing the returns they wanted on uh having multiple episodes, or having episodes let's say 26 weeks out of the year,
Mhm.
or something approaching 50% of the weeks. They saw that and they went, we're not getting it. We're not
Right.
doing that. And it's not just Star Wars. There's other cultural forces involved, economic
course.
forces,
Of course.
and it's the same with the other shows that they're doing as well. Like it's
Mhm.
Marvel's scaling back as well.
Oh yeah.
So but I think what we'll likely see over the next few years is a movie every year,
Mhm.
an animated show every year, or an
Mhm.
animated season every year, and every couple of years some sort of like big event, 4-part event or 5-part event or 3-part event on Disney Plus, where they get everybody to subscribe again for a couple of weeks. You get real excited. Everybody's talking about it. You get cool people involved, whether it's returners to the saga or brand new people who are just kind of interesting and exciting, and you do something special. And this might actually maybe be a little bit of a test for that. And maybe that's why they were so okay with letting Gilroy, sort of dictate how the show would come out.
Mhm.
I think if Disney didn't want to do this, as much as Tony Gilroy might, bang on their door and say, no, do it my way.
Yeah.
They can easily say, hey, Tony, who signs the check? Yeah, that's right. It's Mickey Mouse. And he ain't don't want to do your little 4-week thing. We're going to do it all over 12 weeks. Yeah, if they wanted to do that, they could do that. Bob Iger is apparently Tony Soprano in this analogy.
I can't do a Tony Soprano Mickey.
Yeah.
We're going to boss your head up.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Oh, we're gonna break your legs. I'll be swimming with the fishes. Yeah. So I think that's sort of where we that might be the idea. It's a test to see if this is the way forward.
Yeah.
Or if this can be viable.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's clear to me that they do like Tony Gilroy to let him do this. I think he is.
Yeah.
I don't want to. By the way, I switched to chatting with Dominic Jones. I think we're now in that part of the segment of the podcast, folks. I kind of have like this kind of almost sneaking suspicion, and this is just a conspiracy theory, and I don't like doing this kind of thing most of the time, where it's like, I think Favreau and Filoni and Gilroy, and maybe even John Watts, got a lot of leeway to do whatever they want without really kind of quote unquote studio supervision. I might be wrong. I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. Whereas maybe Headland and Deborah Chow maybe weren't given that complete leeway that they might have given. I don't know. Maybe it's a little conspiracy theory. It's a little suspicious that like it's always the men who kind of get that, not the women.
What makes you think that? Like, what are the signs that are?
Well, I just feel like I just don't see like them like kind of say. I feel like I think Acolyte could have maybe even gone further and maybe not doing the Star Warsy stuff, like even really leaning into that kind of kung fu action kind of mystery thriller. The fact that it had a writer's room but still didn't have a lot of episodes. The fact that Andor has 12 episodes at all kind of says to me they like Tony Gilroy enough to give him that much money, which they did. They gave him the most money. And with Favreau, he made Disney Plus what it is. He is their golden boy. So, he is kind of the, hey, you know what, Favreau, you made Disney Plus successful.
You made this, John.
You get to do whatever you want, more or less. I also see that in terms of like these movie productions too, a little bit, where I have my worries why they keep changing writers for the Rey film. I feel like, with the Mando movie, it's John and Dave going nuts. I mean, I don't think, do you think Bob Iger or Disney executive really care? Like, you must put Rhoda the Hutt in this movie. He is vital to our marketing, Rhoda. It's like, no, it's like they want to do it because, like, I think Rhoda's cool. Levy, if his movie is coming out next, we don't know. I think Disney executive, like, he made Deadpool and made bajillions of dollars for Marvel. He can do whatever he wants, more or less. I'm sure they all have a limit, of course, of what they can and can't do. I'm sure even eventually Kathleen Kennedy's like, hey, hold on, whoa. But I'm sure that leash is very long. Whereas with the Rey film, it's also like, it keeps changing writers. Maybe they don't have, they're a little nervous of what they want. It's not really quote unquote audience reaction. It's more like, oh, do we want to address these things from the sequels? We not. How much of this is about Rey? How much is about our students? What sort of political things are we going to get into? Do we want an empire? Do we want an empire? It's all those sorts of things.
And I think with the Rey movie, the other big question is, what is next?
That too.
Like, what is like there's some. It's unclear what the trilogy is that Simon Kinberg is working on. Right. If it's 10, 11, 12, if it's something else. From what it sounds like it's whatever it is, it's future facing. It's not a Mangold style, let's go way into the past. It's not an Old Republic. It's not a High Republic. It's not set within the Skywalker saga. It sounds like it's forward facing. And so whatever they're doing in this Rey movie does set certain limitations on what Kinberg or whoever might come next can do. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. The original trilogy set limitations on what J.J. Abrams could do in The Force Awakens, and nobody sort of complained about that. But as they're making it up as they go, I think there's an element of, we want to know where we're going before we lock in something. And so they want, probably part of the reason they keep delaying is they want a solid plan for what's next. And so that they don't wind up, creating a situation where they can't do something that they really want to do in the next movie without undoing or invalidating, quote unquote, previous material. And so, the most recent writers change, right? Like, Damon Lindelof and Justin Britt Gibson were taken off the project because there were significant enough differences in their vision from what Kathy Kennedy and Charbonneau Bechinoy wanted to do, that they said, you know what, you guys aren't our pick anymore. We're going to find somebody else who will do what we want. Thank you for your work. We're going to use it as the basis. They probably see a story by credit in there at some point.
Right.
I feel like the changeover from Knight to Nolfi might have just been, all right, Stephen Knight did a couple drafts. Now he has other commitments that he's got to go to, so we can't keep working with him. So let's find somebody else in here to do it. Or he's gotten us as far as we think he can get him. And it's not that we don't like what he's doing. It's just, we want a different voice on this to maybe fully flesh out a few other things here and there. You're looking, it might be a timing thing. It might just be a creative thing. Knight, he gave an interview this past week, mainly talking about Peaky Blinders, but the interviewer asked him a little bit about Star Wars, and he's like, yeah, I expect a lot of my stuff will wind up in that movie. Like, it sounds like things were cooking, like things were moving along pretty well. And they, the change wasn't this script sucks, sorry, Steven, you fired. It was more of all right, contract's up, thanks for what you did, we'll see you at the premiere. So it's sort of like, going from Gary Whitta to Chris Weitz to Tony Gilroy on Rogue One, with a few other people, I think, uncredited in between.
I've heard lots of people.
The Mission Impossible director,
Christopher McQuarrie.
Yeah, he apparently did a draft, and I think somebody else did one as well. So like, there's a few uncredited people in there. But then, cut to the premiere, there they all are standing together being interviewed by Andy Gutierrez or Anthony Carboni. It's like, I kind of wonder if you wind up in a situation where the final script is credited to George Nolfi and Stephen Knight, and there they are together, at the premiere talking about the handoff process, and Nolfi saying, I just can't thank this guy enough for all the work he did, and he gave me such a great basis. And Knight going, and this guy, he took what I did and he just made it so much better, and it was so great, and like a real love-in sort of thing. I kind of wonder if it doesn't feel like there's drama there. Like, I feel like there was maybe a little bit of drama with the first changeover, because we've heard like, oh, it was for this reason, and the reasoning may yet come out, but it's been long enough since Knight was off the project that I feel like if there was a big problem, the Hollywood Reporter would have run a story saying, here's the thing. He wanted to make, it would be revealed that Rey is secretly a Rhodian the whole time, and she rips off her mask, and sort of, if you make the Marvel comparison, Rhodey is a Skrull, and that kind of thing. Like it kind of feels like if there was something like that, if there was a comparison, a big problem, that would have got out. But because there wasn't, it's just sort of like a regular handoff to the next guy to see what he wants to do, just to, create the full picture, while also buying Simon Kinberg and anybody else a little bit more time just to say, all right, here are the key beats of the next trilogy. Please don't do anything that directly impedes this. And if you can set it up in just in these little ways, do that too.
Yeah. I hope so. That's like, I think glass half full, it does seem like there have been lessons learned from trying to build up the sequels. They got actually a single writer, producer person to kind of oversee their trilogy. Even though I'm still with you, Dominic, I think the 3 directors thing could have worked. It just didn't work out that way.
He didn't do 3 directors. He did 2 directors.
Yeah,
he needs to do 3 directors to make it be that sort of Franken trilogy. Instead, it's a Whiplash trilogy. Whiplash trilogy.
Whiplash ping pong trilogy. I don't know.
Yeah.
So they got that. They also aren't trying to rush out one of these. It seems like it seems like the movies that are coming out seem pretty like John and Jay can come out next year, or maybe earlier. It's gonna be next year. Because Jon Favreau knows how to do Mando, and he's got this thing like a machine, man. He's got it going. Maybe Sean Levy can do it next 2027 because he got the script ready. He kind of knows what he wants, right? So unlike Force Awakens, which kind of did have to rush, and JJ even did have to push it back. So that's good too. Glass half empty, where you gotta have a little cynicism. You don't want to feel like they're just in indecision, almost scared to pull the trigger on anything. Because eventually, you gotta,
you gotta do something. Yeah,
you gotta do something. You gotta take a risk. You can't just keep hiring and firing new writers. You gotta do something eventually. Yeah. I'm not completely there yet, but I keep my eye on it. To have a little skepticism, a little bit. But yeah. I'm gonna. So here's my week of Star Wars. I read your Substack of the Ambush.
Thank you.
Or I read a little bit of it.
You read up until the paywall.
Yeah. I'm broke, okay? I do not have money. But I did read up to the part where you were talking about, prequel versus original trilogy Yoda, and how things like Clone Wars are kind of finally bridging those gaps. And it made me realize one of the reasons why I think some of my favorite things in Star Wars aren't even the saga. I mean, I love the saga, don't get me wrong. But I love the Clone Wars. I love, the in-betweeny stuff. I love Rebels. I love some of the shows that are in between the saga stuff, is because of those bridging of the divides, right? Where it's sort of like, yeah, I do think that sometimes if you're just watching these saga films and nothing else, they can sometimes feel a little bit like they're on their own little islands, their own little continents at some times. It can't feel that way to some people. But when you watch Clone Wars and when you watch Rebels, you kind of see, the mixing of prequel and original trilogy things, and now with Mandoverse sequel and prequel and all this sort of stuff come together. I got Bad Batch and Project Necromancer. It really kind of feels like, no, there is no prequel, sequel, original. There is just Star Wars. And you can project. And I love the word you used during a podcast calling project those thoughts and feelings onto those movies. Because I am someone who never likes it when somebody says the Clone Wars fixed the prequels. I hate it because you can't fix a movie, okay? The only way you fix a movie is if you go back and do re-editing and reshooting. Yeah. That doesn't fix the movie. The movie's always going to be the movie. But I do think you can project those feelings that other things that give you that maybe are better, or just that maybe synthesize those elements. And maybe it can affect your experience. It doesn't do it for everybody, of course.
Mhm.
But I know for me, it sometimes does that, and yeah, I think that was a great point that you made in your Substack.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested with the Clone Wars and
Mhm.
going back and looking at,
Mhm.
especially in the early seasons, but throughout that original run,
Mhm.
how it took things from the prequels
Mhm.
that weren't always people's favorite parts
Mhm.
and elaborated on them and
Mhm.
built it out into new and kind of interesting ways. Because the thing about the Clone Wars is it's a prequel era show. It's
Mhm.
made by George Lucas. It's going to remain true to the
Mhm.
prequels. There is nobody who's going to come and undo them. You know,
Right.
it's not going to cancel out anything in the prequels. But it's made almost entirely, especially in those early runs, early days, by people who grew up with the original trilogy. And so
Mhm.
they have a different vision of Star Wars in their mind.
Right.
And what they're doing is they're taking George's prequel ideas and they're kind of putting an original trilogy lens on it.
Yeah.
Um, and you see this a lot throughout the entire series, but I thought Yoda was an interesting one that they kind of start with. I mean, the one that they start with is Anakin, but Yoda is sort of second to that
Mhm.
because this may seem strange to folks who are newer Star Wars fans who became fans with the sequel trilogy or even with the Clone Wars in the later years or Rebels and that sort of thing.
Right.
There was a time when it was very controversial that Yoda would have a lightsaber and fight. And there were a lot of people that thought it was awesome, but
Mhm.
there were also a lot of people that thought it was dumb and didn't
Yeah.
like it.
I know.
And I fell very firmly in the it's awesome camp, just for the
Me
record.
too. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome.
But you know, if you grew up with a very specific image of Yoda that is based on The Empire Strikes Back and
Mhm.
Return of the Jedi to a lesser extent, but mainly The Empire Strikes Back, you want him to be this wizened teacher. You
Mhm.
want him to be someone who just dispenses wisdom. You don't necessarily want him to be flawed in the way that he's flawed
Mhm.
in the prequel era.
Right.
And he himself, I think, if we imagine that Yoda was a real person and existed through all this and gave him a little truth serum, he'd say, yeah, well, yes, flawed I was, couldn't see it, I did. And he talks
Greatest
a lot,
teacher failure was.
yeah, exactly. Well, and he talks about, the shroud of the dark side. They can't use the force. They
Mhm.
can't see what's going on around them. Um,
Mhm.
and he's kind of like, he's a bit of a bureaucrat. Like he's running the council meetings. He's sitting up in this literally an ivory tower. Like he's not with nature. He's not,
Right.
seeing the force in its sort of natural habitat.
Mhm.
And so people didn't like seeing this version of Yoda.
Mhm.
And what the episode Ambush does so beautifully
Mhm.
is it gives you both,
Mhm.
because Yoda takes down that army of droids in a
Mhm.
way that feels more uh in tone with the old, like the Micro series,
Right.
the Andrzej
Right.
Tartakovsky series. It feels more in tone with that.
Mhm.
But he's swinging his lightsaber around, he's jumping, he's flipping, he's doing all that stuff. But there's also this great scene in the cave where he
Mhm.
gets all the troopers to take their helmets off and he just gives them dispenses wisdom to them
Mhm.
during that. And it's like you're getting the best of both worlds. And
Mhm.
what they're saying with that show is you can have he can be both characters. You can have a flawed Yoda. You can
Oh
have a
yeah.
Yoda that fails.
Mhm.
He himself says at the end of Revenge of the Sith, failed I have, into exile I must go. And he's speaking specifically about Palpatine in killing Palpatine, but he could be talking, it also applies to the big picture. They failed to stop the rise of the Sith. It's done. So
Did some shit I did during the High Republic era. Not proud I was.
exactly. Exactly. So you can still have this version of Yoda that fails, but that doesn't remove the
Right.
part of him that's so appealing in Empire Strikes Back, which is that he has this great wisdom that he can share with you, with the audience, with the characters. And so he talks to those clones in that episode in a way that he is reminiscent of the way he talks to Luke. It's not the same.
Right.
He's much less patient with Luke.
I would
Luke.
be too. I would.
He finds Luke quite annoying. Whereas the clones, he's like, hey guys, like, hey, everybody chill, take your helmets off. We'll have a little fire. We'll just vibe for a few minutes. Like he's really like, he's much more laid back. And so it just kind of bridges the two versions of Yoda together. And I think that's where you start to see the cross-generational appeal of that show.
Right.
If you like the prequels, you probably liked the movie. Or if you didn't love it, you're sort of like, well, it's interesting. We'll see where it goes. If you didn't like the prequels, you probably didn't like the movie. And you go back and you read the reviews, and you'll just go look at the Rotten Tomatoes. And people didn't like that movie. That's just how it was. But by the end of the show, it had won a lot of people over. And it continued to win people over while it was off the air during its 6-year hiatus.
Oh yeah.
And it's because it was able to just bring the two trilogies that at times could feel very separate and give you enough of each. It could take the really interesting, stuff of how does Anakin Skywalker become Darth Vader from the prequels. It could take how does the Republic become an empire from the prequels. It can take all that stuff, but it's put through a lens that is more in line with the original trilogy, and so you get characters that are easier to relate to, storylines that evoke the feelings of the original trilogy while dealing with themes of the prequel trilogy.
There is, I'll just say this though, Dominic.
Yeah.
There is actually one thing about that I actually do not like about the Clone Wars. And maybe this is my bias because I read the John Ostrander Republic comics, which Chris loves.
Yeah.
So if you ever read these, maybe you'll notice these too. And it's something you notice in the early seasons of the Clone Wars. Later seasons, I think, get a little bit better about this. But, and this is going to sound really weird, but hear me out. I actually don't like the depiction of the war. Okay, here's why.
Okay.
Especially in those early seasons, they really just go all out and just Republic, the good guys, the Separatists, the bad guys. Like General Grievous had the Death Star. It's not a planet killer, but it's a Death Star.
It's a Death Star, yeah.
It's a Death Star. Every Separatist you meet is a horrible human being. Dooku is just, he is Count Dooku. Yes, my master, we used to destroy the Jedi with our evil weapon of doom. And General Grievous is like, it's like, and, one thing I've always thought about the Clone Wars and how I've always felt the Clone Wars should be depicted is this is the closest thing Star Wars probably will ever get to a gray war. It's the World War I of Star Wars, where if you ever know anything about World War I history, World War I, there are no good guys and bad guys. Everyone kind of sucks. World War II, at least you can kind of, you can outright say, the Nazis are horrible, and the Allies and the Soviets, they're the good guys. They're kicking butt. It's still more complicated than that, but at least you can make that narrative. Yeah. The Clone Wars is supposed to be, and we see this in Revenge of the Sith title crawl, heroes on both sides. And we obviously do get the episode heroes on both sides. So I'm not, decrying that. That's a good episode. But in the Ostrander comics, I think those did a better job of showing Separatist commanders who aren't General Grievous, who were a little bit more, okay, I understand why you're a part of this. Like the Separatists kind of are supposed to be the rebellion of their day. It's just unfortunately their leadership is hijacked by a Sith conspiracy, destroy the Republic from within. And I think Clone Wars those later seasons kind of do it, but also those later seasons kind of step back from the war itself, and as we get into Mortis and Maul and the clone conspiracy stuff, which actually that helps a little bit of not showing the Separatists. I don't want in a more nuanced light. Because I think, especially when you kind of read supplementary stuff that has come out recently and even before. There is a reason why these planets secede. There is a reason why the Separatists, I think, have valid points to make. It's just unfortunately the person leading them is a Sith Lord who's does not have their best interest at heart, and General Grievous.
And of course, the same thing can be said of the Republic, right? It's the same
Yeah.
guy leading you. Yeah, I think that's a fair point about the depiction of the war, because
Mhm.
the thing about the Clone Wars,
Mhm.
the show,
Mhm.
is that it was still George at the helm,
Right.
and George, as the series went on, became more interested in doing different styles, different genres, different, this and that.
Mhm.
But I think especially early,
Mhm.
he was still holding on to a lot of the like classic sort of serials that he watched,
Mhm.
your Flash Gordons and Buck Rogers, and was still kind of playing into that. And you look at season 1 and 2, season 1 in particular, it does feel like they're playing to the Cartoon Network audience a little bit more than they do in the later seasons.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think they're playing it a little safe, saying, all right,
Mhm.
let's make a clear delineation between the good guys and the bad guys. This
Mhm.
is still, it's a kid's show, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And I think you can make that case for season 1.
Mhm.
Gets a little harder in season 2, and by the time you get to seasons 3, 4, and
Oh.
5, it's real hard to say that it's a show that kids can enjoy, but it is not definitive. It's not a kid show, quote unquote.
Right.
Same sort of distinction we make with Skeleton Crew.
Right.
And so I think George was,
Mhm.
he wanted to depict it that way, and I think George has always
Mhm.
been more interested in the heroes of Star Wars, the
Right.
exception being Darth Vader. But even then, the majority of the time that George has spent with working on the Darth Vader character is when he's Anakin Skywalker,
True.
because you get the Clone Wars, right?
Mhm.
Think about the original trilogy.
Mhm.
Think about A New Hope. We'll just start with A New Hope.
Mhm.
Tarkin and Vader don't really get out of archetypes,
True.
right?
Vader's just a
very
glorified henchman,
Yeah,
really.
and Tarkin's a sort of, bureaucrat general kind of thing.
Mhm.
And Palpatine is just the embodiment of evil.
And that's why we love him.
And that's why we love him. Vader gets complicated because they make him into Luke's father, right? Like,
Right.
so there's a complication there. Then
Mhm.
you get to the prequel trilogy.
Mhm.
Maul in Phantom Menace is just an assassin.
A glorified henchman like Vader.
Yeah.
Yep, A New Hope.
Dooku is a placeholder. Grievous is also a placeholder. Like they're meant to show different facets of what Palpatine is looking for in Darth Vader, but they don't really get to be their own characters. There's backstory, but it's largely left to be implied in from the movies themselves, right?
Right.
Whereas Anakin, Obi-Wan, Luke, Padme, Leia, Han,
Mhm.
they get arcs, they get stories, they get, these things. George, I think, was always much more interested in the heroes, and that's reflected in his show. And
Mhm.
that's why, for as many characters that got fleshed out on that show,
Mhm.
Dooku never did.
I never liked that. That's another
And
big critique of Clone Wars I have.
And so Filoni goes back and does it for Tales of the Jedi. And
Mhm.
that's where you see, again, like that's where you start to see what you're talking about, which is the war is more complicated. The war is that. So yeah, I think Clone Wars, it's because it's called the Clone Wars. We
Mhm.
think of it as being this all-encompassing vision of the war.
Right.
And in season 1, so much of our sense, our impressions of this is formed in that first season. I think there was like a little bit more of an attempt to do that. You see more Jedi characters pop in for an episode here and there. Plo Koon gets an episode, Kit Fisto gets an episode, Luminara gets an episode, Ayla gets an episode. Like all of them, like get their own episodes. By season 3, by the back half of season 3, it's the Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, and Captain Rex hour.
And then just becomes the Ahsoka and Rex show by the end.
Yeah, with special guest star Darth Maul, who suddenly George's like, oh, maybe we could do something interesting here. Like he gets more interested as he goes in the villains, and same I think goes for Palpatine as well.
Mhm.
But it becomes more of a show about them,
Mhm.
and so it's called the Clone Wars, but really it's the Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Rex show. much in the same way that Star Wars Rebels is called Star Wars Rebels, but it's not the whole rebellion.
No,
It's the Kanan, Hera, Zeb, Ezra, Sabine, and Chopper show. Like that's what it is. And so we don't look at Rebels and go, oh, I didn't depict the war well enough because it focused on these characters. No, it showed us the war through their eyes. That's not the only story. We're now seeing in Andor and Rogue One and Kenobi and all of these other stories, other visions of the war, other versions of it. We're seeing it through different people's eyes. And I think that's how you have to look at Clone Wars as well, as you're seeing it through the main characters of the prequel trilogy's eyes, plus Ahsoka and Rex. But there is a whole other part of it that hasn't been explored. And the sad thing is it might not get explored for quite some time in books and comics and that sort of thing, because there is so much Clone Wars era storytelling already. There is 7 seasons worth.
A lot of legend stuff if you go back to the old that I grew up on.
But if we're just looking at the canon, we're keeping our eye on canon. That's 7 seasons worth of stuff. They're like, okay, we've told enough stories there, but there's always room for more. There's always room for more. There's room for more stuff in the original trilogy era. There's room for more stuff in the prequel era. There's more stuff specifically in the Clone Wars era, the Mando era, all of that stuff. You can absolutely do more. But
I think you bring up a great point, because this is something I notice a lot with criticism of certain Star Wars projects. Like, I kind of do feel like people were more critical on Rebels because they wanted that full encompassing the war, and didn't realize, oh, this is just about the Phoenix crew. I think people have gone back to Rebels and realized that, and now like, oh yeah, this is about the Phoenix crew, and I love the Phoenix crew. And I think people feel that way about Clone Wars now. And you bring up another great point about Tales of the Jedi. And it's something that I think a lot of us Star Wars fans, at least that's how I feel. I think we as a fandom kind of see Dave Filoni as a Lucas clone. He's a clone. And not his Padawan. And what I mean by that is I think we see Dave Filoni and we think he's going to do everything George would have done. He's going to do the sequel trilogy the George way, right? That's what the Mandoverse is all about. And I'm like, look, Dave learned a lot from George. There's no denying that. But Dave's still his own person. He's still his own creative. He still has his own views on Star Wars. Maybe even some of them a little different than George at times. I've actually read blogs about that, and I think there are some differences if you really want to like look at the nitty gritty. I'm sure big picture, yes, they both agree a lot about the same things. But I always say this. Clone Wars is George's baby through and through. Dave is definitely a part of the creative process, but when push came to shove, George is the boss. So it's like, yes, George, we'll bring back Darth Maul, George. Okay, yes, okay, yeah. That's why Dave is like, thank God we never got to Ahsoka, because I don't know if I could do that argument if she has to live or die. And I always say, if you want to get a good sense of Dave Filoni as a creative outside of George, you got to watch Rebels. I think Rebels is more of his vision of what Star Wars is. And obviously Ahsoka, of course, that's the big one. But, I think Rebels, if you really want to get Dave Filoni's views on Star Wars outside of George's influence and see him kind of, grow what we pass. What's the last shit
they are what we grow. We are what they grow beyond.
We are what we grow beyond. That's how you gotta watch Rebels, right? Because, first big thing, I don't think George would ever think about putting Grand Admiral Thrawn in Star Wars. Be like, Grand Admiral, what now? So I think that's a big thing to always look at as well.
Yeah, well, I think the distinction I would make is Dave will never contradict George.
Oh no.
He'll never do something that he knows George would be adamant against. It's why we didn't see the Ysalamari with Thrawn, right? George is like, that's not a thing. That's not how that would work. That you can't cut someone off from the Force like that.
Right.
But he won't necessarily do all of the exact same things that George would do. And his Star Wars experience is formed by other stuff. Exactly. It's not just, George's Star Wars version, Star Wars stuff is formed by what is in his brain. which is formed by, watching other movies and reading history and all the stuff that he was interested in that led to him
Living in the
creating Star
60s.
Wars.
Insane.
Exactly. But Filoni has seen other people's visions of Star Wars. He read the Thrawn trilogy. He read a lot of Legends material when it was, just the expanded universe, because he grew up and he was just a fan. He never thought he would get to do that. And so he has seen other people's visions of Star Wars. He's gotten more up close and personal with George's vision of Star Wars than anybody else, which is something I get into in the Ambush Substack. We go into that because we do get into some Force related things because of some dialogue that Yoda has in that episode. But he won't contradict George. So if George says this is definitive in my universe, unless he has an extreme reason to do it, I don't think he will. I think he'll go, okay, I can't do that. But he's not going to think the exact same things as George. He's going to come up with his own stories that won't necessarily be what George would do. It will be more in line with George's vision of the grander universe, but it won't be what George would do exactly. And, if we look at something like Andor, right?
Right.
I don't know if George ever fully does something like that. I think he would maybe have wanted the live action show, the Underworld show, to be kind of like that.
He think it's what he'd be making, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right?
But I don't know if he ever would or could. I don't know if he has the same sort of, because he has a different vision than, say, Tony Gilroy and what Tony Gilroy brings to it, and Tony Gilroy brings a vision that is, I don't care about the lore. I'll let other people tell me about the lore. I'm interested in just a story here.
Although I do think Andor is pretty close to a lot of George's political themes and Star Wars.
Certainly. Yeah. Certainly. But that's all I'm getting at is George loves his characters.
Right.
And I think with Clone Wars, just to go all the way back to your original point, Joel, I think Clone Wars, maybe he intended to do more of what you're saying, like Ostrander and everybody did. And I've read a little bit of those comics. I'd like to go back and read them more, but I haven't yet. I think he probably looks at that but he got caught up in Clone Wars and went, I'm still interested in Anakin. I want to see more stuff with Anakin. I want to do more stuff with Obi-Wan. And boy, this Ahsoka character we've created is interesting. And I love doing stuff with her and Anakin and Obi-Wan. And that's why you get the show that you get, which again, like we said, it's a vision. It's one perspective on the Clone Wars. It's not the Clone Wars in the same way that Rebels is a perspective on the Rebellion. It's not the Rebellion. And I agree with you that some of the response to Rebels was that it wasn't the Rebellion in the way that perhaps some of us were hoping when it was announced, but have since come to appreciate what it is and what it does in its own right.
Yeah, you were talking on a podcast about how because there's so much, we don't go back and we don't reevaluate a lot. And I agree with that. I think I definitely agree with Din's point of there's too much, man. Marvel has that problem in spades. Star Wars at least has kind of died down early enough before we got to the Marvel problem of too many shows, man, too many shows. But I do still see some of that reevaluation, and I've seen it a lot with Rebels. I really have over the last few years where let's face it, Rebels kind of got, unfortunately, the short end of the stick because it was it's the show that after the Clone Wars got unceremoniously canceled. People were a little bitter. I've talked to our good friend Ben. He was kind of a little this Rebels is taking my Clone Wars, man. I've talked to him about this on and off air, so he's fine. So here, Ben, hi, listen. People felt that way. Move to today. I see a lot of people who love Rebels. They love that show. It's their favorite Star Wars thing. I even see people say they like it more than Clone Wars, right? It's gotten to that, at least on my social media end, everyone's different, of course, in terms of our social media, talking. But I have seen a lot more reevaluation of it just overall from it's the show that took Clone Wars and what's this Aladdin-like character to Ezra's back, and I love him, and like Kanan and Hera, and I love the Ghost Crew, and I'm all for Lothal and Thrawn, and
Well,
it's
I
great.
think this is something that we'll see more and more
Hmm.
because Rebels is over 10 years old now.
Right.
Spark of Rebellion airs in fall 2014.
Hmm.
So if you're 10 when that episode airs,
Hmm.
you're turning 21 this year. You've grown up. Your social media presence is going to be a lot more than it was
Yeah.
when you were 10.
Hmm.
And for everybody that grew up with that show,
Hmm.
now they're adults
Hmm.
and they're talking about it, and they're talking about why they loved it, and
Hmm.
they're talking about how much they loved it. And we saw a version of this with the prequels themselves,
Oh yeah, big time.
in the last decade as well.
Hmm.
Less than a decade, I'd say it's the last like 7 years, where folks who grew up with it started saying like, no, like this is our Star Wars, we love it. And where I remember this just sort of shows you how quickly this happens where, because people grow up. Um, Star Wars Celebration 2013 is in Essen, Germany,
Hmm.
and it's celebrating 30th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, which we celebrated the 40th anniversary of it 2 years ago. So
Dang.
yeah, boy, time
Ooh.
isn't time great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but they're celebrating that, and they do this great outdoor screening of Return of the Jedi. And it's
Hmm.
a really lively audience. Everyone's having fun. You cheer when the Emperor gets thrown down the shaft. It's awesome.
Hmm.
When Hayden Christensen's face shows up for the Force Ghost,
Oh boy.
the overwhelming response from that audience was to boo.
Ooh. Ouch.
Now,
Ooh.
I think if Hayden had walked out on stage, people would have applauded and been cheering and kind and all that stuff. But the response towards prequel related things and special editions related things was a negative one. Now Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, they're rock stars at
Oh yeah.
Celebration. They
Hmm.
walk out on stage and it's an ovation, and they're wiping tears from their eyes and all that stuff. Like it's because the people that grew up with the prequels are now maybe not the loudest voice, but they're a loud voice.
Hmm.
And Hayden's first Celebration appearance since the prequels was 4 years after that booing of his face at Celebration Germany, at Celebration Orlando for the 40th anniversary of Star Wars.
Hmm.
And when he walked out on stage, there was an ovation. It
Mhm.
was huge. Everybody was thrilled to see him, but he had a look on his face of like, I'm ready to duck a tomato if I have to. Like I have to
Oh.
ready to duck. He didn't need to. Everybody was cheering, and there was a big ovation. There were a few. I remember seeing like a few snarky tweets afterwards, like, "Why are everybody cheering for Hayden Christensen? Didn't these people see Attack of the Clones?" It's like, shut up. But there was an evolution there over just 4 years from Celebration Germany to Celebration Orlando, and I think that evolution has happened again with Rebels, where now that it's been off the air, the folks that grew up with it are now a louder voice. And
Mhm.
the people that didn't like it have either reevaluated it or just moved on.
Okay.
Which you wish people who didn't like certain other things would also move on, but that's a separate conversation.
I feel that.
And so, yeah, there is a real love for Rebels, and you can feel it out there, and you can see it out there. You go
Mhm.
on, Instagram, TikTok, and you see the people loving Rebels, and the same people they like the Clone Wars and they like Bad Batch, but like they're number one
Mhm.
is Rebels, is Canon, is Hera, it's Ezra, it's Sabine, it's Zeb, it's Chopper, and like their favorite Ahsoka moments are all in Rebels. Their favorite Rex moments all in Rebels, and that's totally fair. That's totally valid.
No, here I am in my little corner, like resistance, love, because Kaz, he's the best. Got my green shirt.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, but no, I agree. Um, I have to look at my notes out here. We talk a lot about George's vision and
Mm.
George's stories. I wonder, James Mangold's about to do, hopefully, pray to the Morris gods, a Dawn of the Jedi movie. That's a big deal. That is
Yeah.
the origins of the Jedi Order.
Mm.
I wonder. Well, I'm sure Lucasfilm is gonna give Mangold leeway to do what he needs to do. Of course, I don't think they're instructing him to like, you have to do this or else you will be fired. I think Kennedy and Mangold have a good relationship. I mean, they worked on Indy 5
Mhm.
together. I think they at least enjoyed yourself of like, hey, you got it done for us, Mangold. You did the assignment. Good for you. Um, I wonder if like during the creative process, someone from Story Group or Dave or someone will like, hey, George told me a story once of what he once thought about the origins of the Jedi. And this is what he had to say. It's like, you
Mm.
see, it was about this guy named Jed, and he had an eye at the end of his name was silent. You see,
Hey.
I doubt that, but I do think. I mean, we do know George had ideas of what the ancient Jedi and Sith kind of storyline was. I don't know if you've ever read the Phantom Menace novelization by Terry
Mm.
Brooks, but if you read that, there are little hints about what the Jedi and Sith origins were. With the Jedi, it's like they say the Jedi origins are wrapped in mystery, but they were once like a study group that decided to go out and learn and help use their magical abilities, and then they got all tangled up in the Republic. And then with the Sith, it's like, yeah, eventually, Jedi thought, hey, the dark side's cool, let's do that. And like, he took 50 dudes, and they started this order, but then they all killed each other. And then this
Mm.
one guy called Bane showed up. Because remember, Jar Bane's technically a Lucas character.
Yeah, yeah.
Just that Drew Karpyshyn just went his own way with it. And those books are great.
Mhm.
Um,
They're so good.
oh yeah, but I do wonder, if Filoni, the story group, aren't telling Mangle, but just, hey, Mangle, do you want some inspiration? Here's some old Lucasy notes, and maybe we can recycle these old ideas that George had about the Jedi origin. Maybe George did think, they were a nerdy study group and they all read poetry. And then Mangle just kind of,
It's just a Dead Poet Society, but in space.
yeah,
I
exactly. That's
just get that.
exactly, but with George, that was George's idea. But I don't know,
Right.
Dominic. I mean, we talked about how they love using old George's ideas. I mean, they
Mhm.
might even do some stuff with Maul. With what do you think? You think Mangold's getting those notes, or you think Mangold's just doing his own thing, or mix of both?
I'm genuinely curious. Somebody comes in and says, I want to do, Origin of the Jedi, Origin of the Sith. I want to do something. Or honestly, somebody comes in and just wants to do a Star War.
Mm-hmm.
How much they are given as sort of supplemental material to, the stuff that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't expect that James Mangold has seen every episode of the Clone Wars or Rebels or even the Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible he has, but I don't expect that. And I certainly don't expect him to have read every issue of every Marvel comic or read every
Yeah.
novel. Like that's unrealistic expectation. It's great if somebody has, like Leslie Headland did,
Oh yeah.
but it's not. I don't think that's not a requirement.
Right.
But I wonder how much sort of supplemental material you're given from Lucasfilm when you start writing your script and what that is. So, you could be given stuff like, okay, give me an overview of all of the events of this era. And then, Leland Chi and Pablo Hidalgo prepare a document and says, all right, here's everything that happens from, during the reign of the empire. And you can read that and just, make sure you don't contradict this too much.
Right.
But then when you start getting into stuff like the Force and the history of the Jedi and the history of the Sith and some of the bigger mysteries of the Star Wars universe,
Mm-hmm.
how much is there from George?
Mm-hmm.
Because he obviously did a lot.
Yeah.
He did a lot and thought of a lot of things and created a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
How much did he leave behind? Did he leave behind all of his notes? Did he
Mm-hmm.
let Dave Filoni summarize his notes? Did Dave Filoni create a summary based on their conversations together? Or is there something more? I remember hearing, and I don't know if this is true, but I remember hearing that there was like a rumor somewhere that there was like an extended video of George talking about the Force that was like 30 minutes or something that you could watch if you were working on a Star Wars. And like we got a little taste of it on the Complete Saga Blu-ray. There's that great featurette, George Lucas on the Force 2010. And it's recorded from a Clone Wars writers meeting. And clearly they were filming the Clone Wars writers meetings, or at least some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I wonder if you're James Mangold or you're somebody else and you say, all right, I want to do this video, this movie of the Dawn of the Jedi. If you then sent to a room at Lucasfilm and said, all right, you can watch these videos of George explaining his vision of it. You're not necessarily required to stick to it, but this is there. Or if it's just provided to you as an option, or if, you know, if there's something like that, because, you know, George created this universe. His word to me still carries a lot.
Right.
But I don't think it will be the be all and end all for everybody else.
Well, you know, to go back to Leslie Headland for a second, if she had gotten to do season 2 of Anchorline, which she should have,
Yeah.
you know, how much of Darth Plagueis is she going to take from whatever the heck George had of Darth Plagueis in his notes, if he was even a character in his mind? But also, it's like, you know, do I take George's weight, or do I take the weight of this very successful, beloved Darth Plagueis book by James Luceno? And then again, how much did James Luceno take from whatever George might have said? If George said anything, I think the idea to make him immune was George. I don't remember. I've heard that rumor. I'm not 100% sure on that. But, you know, again, that's the beloved book.
With the Plagueis book, like, there was, I think, a higher level of involvement from the upper echelons of Lucasfilm than there was for most Star Wars books.
Like the Thrawn trilogy, probably.
Yeah. You know, if like Plagueis was coming out at the same time as like Fate of the Jedi. I don't think the upper echelons of Lucasfilm were really caring what was going on in Fate of the Jedi. They're like,
I don't think anybody did. I know what Fate of the Jedi is about. Like, what the heck?
Yeah. They're like, all right, let's let that be. But Darth Plagueis, because it was so essential, like that, because it's a character whose name carries a lot of weight, and is pretty important to the overall history. I believe, like, Howard Rothman, who was the president of Lucasfilm for a long time, was much more involved in that book, and I think he was there was a certain amount of him shepherding things to George and getting like approval from George and getting input from George in a way that you didn't typically have with, you know, Fate of the Jedi or you know, Coruscant Knights or, you know, Star Wars Scoundrels or something like that. I think I don't think I don't think George was interested in those, but I think there was an element sort of like with the Force Unleashed, the video game, right? I remember seeing this. There's like a making of documentary or video, like something about it, and in it they show everybody like the key creatives sitting around a fax machine waiting for a fax to come from George with like approvals for certain things. And I wonder if it's just sort of like that kind of thing, like they like Luceno sends to the editor a list of plot points, the editor a list of, you know, an outline. The editor pulls out a couple of key things that they're like, I wonder about this, and they send those to Rothman. And Rothman's like, I'm gonna ask George about 5 of these 7 things, and then George, you know, he asks George about it, scribbles down some notes, types up the notes, sends them back to the editor, sends it back to Luceno. Like, I wonder if there's like an element of like that, of like, just like, we'll just send George a little bit of stuff. I don't think, you know, maybe Luceno might have talked about this or somebody. I think if George had met with Luceno, we would have heard about it. I think somebody would have said, yeah, they had a meeting. They'll never tell you what was in that meeting, but they had a meeting. Much in the same way that like Jason Fry met with Rian Johnson while writing The Last Jedi novelization. And there's video of their meeting. It's quiet and it's them shaking hands and sitting on a couch. And then I think the doors closed and the cameras were taken away. But like, you know, they had there was a legitimate back and forth between those two.
I know. I've heard, I always forget if it's Terry Brooks or Matthew Stover with both. They had like a phone call with George when writing the novelizations for the prequels, and that's why certain backstory things are in those 2 novels. I even heard a thing of like Matthew Stover like under NDA for certain things that George told him.
Wow.
Not to say. And then I know other stories of like Tom Veitch talked to like George's secretary when doing the Tales of the Jedi, and to kind of like get a basic understanding of like what's the Sith, and that's why certain things like the rule of two are kind of there, but kind of not there. Um, so it seems very in and out. But yeah, as much as we all want creative to have their creative freedom, of course, we don't want the big business exec saying, "Oh, we need a Wookiee in here. We need a Death Star 3." There is a little bit of responsibility to be have if you're going to do the shared universe thing, not even like in a Marvel sense, but just like if I don't ever want to see a Star Wars that say, "Hey, great Jedi," those are
Yeah.
cool, man. Um, and Mangled is definitely one of the, and this is what Mangled movie is the most exciting for me, and why I want it to happen.
Hmm.
He's dealing with a big, kind of important topic to Star Wars lore, and it's the origin of the Jedi, and I think the Jedi are Star Wars. They are the most Star Wars thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess the question is if you're Lucino or not Lucino, if you're
Mangled.
Mangold, that's the one. I nearly said Stover. If you're Mangold, if you are writing that movie, if you're making that movie, how much input do you want from George? Are you interested in hearing all of his ideas,
Mhm.
or do you have your own vision and you're not really interested? You're like, I want to do this version of the Jedi. And if that contradicts something that George said, are you really worried about it? Now, again, I think there are people at Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni, chief among them, who really do care what George thinks. And like I said earlier, I don't think Filoni ever wants to explicitly contradict George.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes George's notes and things like that. And so if I don't think the project gets to the point of being made if it's not one of two things. At least partially in line with what George was doing. Yeah, maybe not the exact same idea, but sort of the same spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Or just so good, it completely blows what George had out of the water. And I think if it's so good that everybody just goes, yeah, let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's less likely. I think what's more likely is it's excellent, it's very good, but it's at least spiritually in line with what George was doing, if not, what you would have imagined from George's notes. It at least sort of you're like, well, it's the same spirit. It's the same kind of idea, just depicted differently. Just we go about it different way.
Yeah, I think a little bit about Mangled to me kind of comes off as a guy who would at least take a look, even if it just
Well,
he seemed very open about that. Oh,
yeah, and Mangold has the kind of movies that Mangold is most known for are comic book movies
mhm,
and biopics. And you don't make a complete unknown or Walk the Line or Ford versus Ferrari, frankly,
mhm,
without looking at the history that already exists and
right.
saying, how do I tell this story really interestingly in a movie?
Mhm,
He didn't go, hey, there was this guy, Bob Dylan, who wrote a couple of interesting songs. Now I'm going to make up my own whole other thing. He's like, no, let me tell this story of this chapter in Bob's life in my own way, based on conversations with Bob, based on books,
mhm,
his documentaries, the history of it. Like he does that. So he might be a guy that goes, yeah, okay, I have a vision for, what the Jedi should be. That's,
right,
informed by my own experiences watching Star Wars.
right.
But I'd like to see what George thinks, and I'm gonna do my best to bring those visions together, and I'm gonna do that because that is sort of how you make a biopic in a sense. So you
Right.
have a vision for how you want to tell this story, and then you look at the facts of the history and you try and make them mesh. Now, a lot of biopics make up a lot of stuff, but I don't get the impression that it sounds like A Complete Unknown is fairly true to, what really happened in Dylan's life. And so I suspect that the same sort of thing would happen where he would be fairly true to what George's vision would be if he's aware of it. If he gets to read, George's old notes or the summary that the story group prepares of what George left them, or watch, some videos from Clone Wars sessions.
Yeah, and to go back to George's vision, this is where my another controversial Joel take comes in. This is why, in some ways, Dominic, when it comes to this stuff, I am more interested in George's vision than, say, the sequels. Only because I kind of have like this sneaking suspicion in my heart of hearts that when it comes to the sequel trilogy and when George talks about a vision and whatnot, I don't think George has had a very concrete one in the same way he did with the prequels, right? Where the prequels, I think he always knew he was going to do them. It's just he needed a good long break and to get over his divorce and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But like, remember, he never let the expanded universe touch that area. It was like,
Yeah.
you do not touch this. But you can touch the post-Endor area. Go ahead, tell Luke Han and Leia stories fighting blue guys and clone emperors. So, while I'm sure George did have like, maybe some outlines and some treatments and some ideas, I always feel like they were never as like, this was always my vision for the sequels. This was always going to be how we do it. This was the plan from day one. When they changed Force Awakens, I think that was more a change, honestly, from the guy who did Toy Story 3 to Kasdan and JJ just doing their own little reshuffle thing. Because, like, I don't know how concrete, like, Episode 9 George's version was. We know Luke was gonna die, I guess, but how much of that is just, like, as far as George ever got? Maybe and, like, even the Darth Maul stuff, I'll be honest, I wonder how concrete that was, or how just, like, that was an early draft George had, and if he kept going, maybe he would have changed out Darth Maul. I don't know. He never got that far. But, it's one of those things where it's like, that's where I'm more okay with, like, not sticking with George's vision, because I don't even know how much of a vision, maybe even outside Episode 7, there really was, compared to maybe the Origins of the Jedi, where George probably has some notes scribbled for years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, his notes on the Origins of the Jedi, Origin of the Sith, like that's the stuff that informed the storytelling of the prequels, and informed the storytelling of the originals, and informed the storytelling of the Clone Wars. Like it's a big, you're right. It's like all encompassing. Whereas, I think you're right. The idea for doing the sequels properly came about fairly late in the game. My theory, and there's nothing but circumstantial evidence to back this up, is that George started wanting to becoming interested in doing the sequels while working on the Clone Wars, because he was having fun doing the Clone Wars with Filoni and everybody. And it was that combined with his efforts to get the TV shows off the ground weren't really working. So he wanted to, the live action TV shows, I should say. So he felt like, okay, I need something more than just a Star Wars show to get to get the attention and the backing, because he wanted to build that studio that he got blocked from in San Francisco.
Right.
And I think there's the thing of like, okay, if they won't do it for the shows, maybe they'll do it for the movies, and maybe they'll do it for the movies if I get Harrison, Mark, and Carrie back. And you know what? I've been having so much fun doing these Star Wars stories with Dave and Henry and Steven and all those guys that we're working with. Screw it. Let me make another. Let's take a stab at writing 7, 8, and 9 and see what there is. I have all these ideas I've always wanted to do, that explore the Force and explore this and that. So let's start thinking about that. And so I think that sort of, there was a confluence of events that made him go, oh yeah, maybe this would be fun. And then he realized how much work it would be, and that's when he and the studio plans got blocked, and that's when he went, all right, maybe somebody else can make them, and I can be an advisor, sort of in the same way he was an advisor for the Clone Wars. But because he then chose to sell it to Disney and not be, on the hook financially for it. As soon as he took his financial backing away from it, then it's somebody else gets to make the final say, and Bob Iger, and the Disney board, and Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams agreed with this. They wanted to do, something that was a throwback. They wanted to do the fan service movie, and they did. And I love The Force Awakens, and they did all the fan service stuff while also telling a really good, new story. Playing the groundwork for something really interesting and really new in that movie as well. So. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm downplaying The Force Awakens and what it accomplished, because I really do think it's great.
Oh yeah.
But it just kind of, but you know, they went that direction, whereas George's vision, however, you know, half formed it may have been, was based on I think his version of the way the sequel trilogy gets made in his mind is he sits in a room with a writer, just like they telling them stories, and they go back and forth, and then the writer goes away and writes a draft, and then they meet again. He gives a bunch of notes, and the writer comes back. Like he would just sort of, he would get to tell somebody the story, and then somebody would go and write the script based on what he told them.
Right. Yeah. You know, George has feelings, of course. I don't want to dismiss those feelings.
No.
But I also am kind of like, well, George, if you really wanted to make it, you should have just made it. But
Yeah.
um,
And maybe that's what he screams into his pillow at night. Melody Hobson's like, George, you sold it. Get over it, bud.
no, I mean, you know, whether I mean, I'll be honest. I've always been a little concerned if George had made it, because like, dude's getting old, and he was never the best of health.
Well,
I would have worried about what would have happened if that episode 7 is like the prequels, and we're just go through it again. That could hurt.
yeah,
him.
and
I don't want.
you know, again, this gets back into the thing about like prequel Yoda and original Yoda is, you know,
Sequel
at the
Luke.
time people forget, you know, people sometimes or willfully forget that when the sequels were announced, people were the general populace, general audiences were not in favor of the prequels the way they are now.
Right.
And it was seen as a good thing that George was selling. It was seen as a good thing that George wasn't going to be involved, or that he wasn't going to be like directing, that somebody else would be directing. That was all viewed as a good thing. And you know, the Force Awakens panel at San Diego Comic-Con in 2015, they spent so much time talking about like going back to the old ways. We're doing real sets, practical effects, not a lot of CGI. And that was exciting to a lot of people. There were also some people who were more prequel fans that like were offended by that and insulted by it and thought they were insulting George. And I think George felt they were kind of insulting him a little bit. I don't think that was their intention, but that was the feeling, was like, you know what? They people don't like the prequels, so we're going to do something other than that. And that's why, like, you know, the word Sith gets mentioned once in each of Force Awakens and Last Jedi.
It's not until episode 9 where it's like it's all over the place.
Episode 9, it's all over the place, because that was, again, it gets back into that thing. The culture had shifted at that point, and all of a sudden people were into the prequels. And you know, I've said this before, at the time they didn't appreciate what they had in Sith as a word. Right. That it had become stand-in for villain, but they associated it with prequel, and so they said, nah, we'll throw it in as an Easter egg. But people thought Jedi Sith, that was a mainstream pop culture idea. Long, you know, that was one of the few things out of the prequels really that became a sort of mainstream pop culture idea. But yeah, so I think, you know, if George had made episode 7, all the people now that say, we wish we'd seen his version, one, it would have been just as woke as the thing that got actually made. And I say woke sort of ironically, because, you know, people that complain about that's such a ridiculous thing to complain about. But like, you know, his movies were very political. You read what he's always said. It was going to have a female lead. The sequel, the old cast were all going to die off. Let the past die. Like all that stuff was still going to happen. But you know, he would have borne the brunt of the culture war that was coming and the let's just hate on George Lucas. The George Lucas, will say, ruined my childhood, instead of the other thing that people talk about, the other R word that people use about that.
And I fear what would have happened if he had to. I mean, he's old. I mean, you know, I'm glad he got to retire.
He would have. Yeah, he would have been miserable. Like, you know, I think he would have, like, you know, I think the prequels, the backlash of the prequels was hard on him. And I think this would have been really hard on him too. And, you know, for as much as he may have some regrets about giving up control of Star Wars, he's driving fast cars around and living his best life with his wife and their kids. And like, you know, he's getting to just sort of have fun and be an old guy, be an old rich guy. And so I think, you know, he gets to be retired, and like I want to be retired. I want to be retired and live like George Lucas. You know.
I do too.
So I don't think I think in the grand scheme of things, he's probably happier. But I bet there are times when he thinks, man, I just had a great idea for a great story for Anakin. I wish I could go and tell it somewhere.
Yeah,
Or
I mean, I'll
yeah,
even say to myself, I mean, I wasn't on the George Lucas hate train, but I was like, "Oh, cool." I kind of like to me when Disney bought Star Wars, my kind of thought was, "Oh my god, expanded universe, but with movies now." Right?
yeah,
That was my thought. Like that. Like I was more into like the Rogue Ones and the Andor, where it's like
yeah,
George would never make this, but these people will.
yeah.
So that was kind of my excitement. But I was never a George Lucas hater.
No,
Of
no.
course, but I understand why people thought that for sure.
Hmm.
As we kind of near the hour, I'll go into like one more topic,
Okay.
and I mean I could do this forever, but I'm sure we all want to go to bed eventually. Um, and this one's gonna be a rumor. So Dominic,
Ooh, I
I
heard a
heard a
rumor.
rumor say you brought a broken heart. So I normally don't read these kinds of rumors on Reddit
Mm,
for a variety of reasons. I don't trust them. I kind of only trust them if they're coming from, better sources I know, Jeff Snyder's or that sort of thing.
mhm.
But I'm going to read this because it's not, it kind of got like a not as fanficky kind of vibe as
Okay.
some rumors are. Like, some rumors you can feel like, this feels kind of fanficky. This one does not. This feels like I can see this.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. This is from Farbrief6740 on Reddit. A few things that will be announced at Celebration. Heard this from two trusted sources. I understand the skepticism since I'm new on here, though.
Is this
Uh,
on the Star Wars Leaks Reddit?
yes, this is.
Okay.
So this is
Cool.
what he says. Tales of the Bounty Hunters featuring Jango Fett. Darth Maul animated series, which was pitched years ago, but has now been in active development. Ventress is also in it. Clone series. I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but new info. As many have guessed, it's about Wolf, Rex, and Gregory reunite. This is Commander Cody stuff in here too. Also, as I said, Rex recruits the rebellion. This is a limited series, so it sounds like a one and done.
Mhm.
Tales of the Sith. Star Wars Vision spin-off series. Young
Ooh.
Jedi Adventures spin-off. There's a ton of animation being worked on, but there are concrete ones. As I said, they'll be announced at Celebration, but if they aren't, I won't post anything I've heard again. Oh, poor guy. So, hang on, I'm gonna drink some water. So, yeah, I read that,
So
and
it
I thought to
was. So
myself,
just to recap it, it was Clones animated series, Tales
one
of the
no,
Bounty Hunter,
yeah, Tales of the
Visions,
Sith,
Tales of the Sith, and then Vision spinoff.
Vision spin-off, Young Jedi Adventures spinoff,
Okay.
and a Maul Ventures
Mall
thing.
series.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like what he's saying is Clone series is a one season thing, and then it sounds like the Maul season series will be the multiple season animated show akin to like Bad Batch and Rebels
Mm,
and all that stuff. Um, so I read this and I thought to myself, I can kind of believe some of this. Tales
mhm.
of the Bounty Hunters seems like the next logical steps because and I can see one day a Tales of the Sith. I've actually heard that from other people too. So that's been floating around. Um, the clones thing I also kind of believe just because of what Bad Batch was doing in that final season. And the mall thing again is something I can believe with Ventures because again, Bad Batch was setting it up, and I remember hearing about a mall animated series
Mhm.
years ago. I think Jordan Mason posted something like that a couple years
Mhm.
ago as well. The Visions thing I'm not sure about, but then again, considering we're going to Japan and Visions is kind of originated in Japan, even though they kind of made it international.
Mhm. Mhm.
Season 2, I can kind of maybe see like maybe they want to finally do a Star Wars anime, and if they do, I want that 'cause I love anime. And I can kind of see them continuing the Young Jedi Adventures kind of brand 'cause it's
Yeah.
cute kitty stuff.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, if it doesn't happen, I wouldn't also be surprised. But I also kind of hope it is because hey, if live action taking a bit of a downturn, let's go back to animation. It's
Mhm.
been on this. It's still one of their more solid things. But I don't know, Dominic. What's your vibe? What's your sense? What do you think?
Yeah. It's interesting. I It's a lot.
It
I
does a
think
lot.
that's my takeaway. It's almost too much.
Yeah, that's my red flag too.
That's kind of the one thing. Like
Mhm.
the clone series, I think that's happening. Like that
Mhm.
seems like just too obvious.
Mhm.
Doing another Tales series and doing it like Tales of the
Mhm.
Bounty Hunters, that's pretty cool. The Darth Maul animated series, it's interesting. It's
We have
interesting.
Ventress here we did get Ventress, and she's a Dathomirian, Maul the Dathomirian.
Yeah.
Dathomir's kind of hot right now.
It is. It's interesting. Visions getting a spinoff is something I think a lot of people have wanted. You take
Mhm.
the first what's the first one of the first season, or the one that's what's called the Ninth Jedi. Like you take one of those ones and you say, all right, let's turn this into like a limited series and there's something cool there. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like any of these individually
Mhm.
sort of makes sense to me. All of them together, I don't know. Like
Yeah.
it feels like too much. I wonder if it's possible that there's something in here that's the Darth Maul one. That's the one that sort of feels. I don't know. I'm just going like I don't know. I don't know anything. But I'm
Okay.
just going off of the feeling of that. Like that's the one that feels really just sort of fan speculatey. Like yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. Because it's fans that are in charge. It's fans that are in charge. So anything that's sort of a bit of fan speculation could easily be real because a fan is making it. So
Yeah.
I
Um.
I could go with any of it. Look, any of this that's announced, I'd love it. I'd be there for it. I think that would be really really cool. Um,
I for no.
let me say this.
Yeah.
I won't say which,
Mhm.
but I've heard of one of these being in development.
Right.
But
I
the rest of them, look, I'd love it. Bring it on. But it feels like a lot. It feels like so much, and that's a bit of a
Mhm.
yeah, like you said, red flag. It's a concern.
One thing I did find interesting though when we talked about the clone series, which apparently he's brought up before,
Mhm.
is it's a one and done limited series. I think that's an interesting specific thing to bring up. I think.
Yeah.
Because it's so often I can just say, "Hey, look at the Clone series, the Maul series, a Sidious series, a Snoke series." Part of me can believe that only
Mhm.
because, look, we had 3 seasons of Bad Batch. That was all about the clones.
Mhm.
I know some people are getting cloned out. I love D. Bradley Baker,
Yeah.
but I'm ready to explore some other stuff too in the dark
Sure.
times outside of the clones, right?
Yeah.
And that's why part of me wants to kind of hopes it's true because, like, I think I'd be more okay with a clone series if like it's just a one and done. Maybe this is the 2025 animated show,
Mm,
and then 2026 we get a new animated show that's multiple seasons dealing with a different topic. Maybe the
right.
Underworld, the actual criminal underworld, and that involves Ventress and Maul and the crime syndicates, which is something
Mhm.
we haven't really explored that much in terms of like the direct impact. And they were setting something up for Ventress in Bad Batch. I mean, you don't bring her back just to not do anything with her,
Mhm.
right? You got to do
Mhm.
something. I don't think Filoni would as well.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of where my belief in this lies. Tales of the Sith, I also can see happen. I'm curious if like these all are happening, but maybe they just won't be announced at
Yeah.
Celebration. I can see like we space out the announcement, but they're all still happening in some form.
Mhm. Yeah. That's the thing. Like I think for Celebration, I think you get an announcement of whatever the next Tales
Hmm.
series is, and maybe they shock everybody and they announce 2 Tales
Right.
stories. Um, Certainly because you're in Japan. If there's a Vision spinoff, especially if it's like anime, it's a continuation of something from season 1 or season 3. I think that's, that's very like that feels very possible. The Young Jedi Adventure spinoff, like that, I think, I expect there'll be a Young Jedi Adventures panel, and that'll be part of that announcement rather than something that's like on the main stage at like the Lucasfilm showcase, if assuming they do that again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see all of this happening, and I can see none of it happening.
I
Like,
know.
it
You want to
has-
know one of the weirdest things about the Tales of the Sith part of it all? Because I heard a different rumor about this a while ago.
Mhm,
Because this has popped up by other people.
mhm.
One of the more fascinating kind of rumors about this project, if it's real, somebody said that the two characters they're going to focus on are Balin and Darth Bane.
Mm,
And at first, that kind of, again, kind of a little fanfic, a little raised my eyebrow.
yeah.
But a couple things that came to mind. First
Mhm.
off, just because it's called Tales of the something doesn't necessarily need to be that strict. I mean, Tales of the
Yeah.
Empire, Morgan Elsbeth and Barris are Empire adjacent. Morgan
Mhm,
Elsbeth's a little more closer to the Empire, but she's all about Dathomir, and Barris tails it out of there in the second
mhm.
episode. So she's not really a servant of the Empire anymore. Like compared to like it'd be like Thrawn or Vader, right? Those are the real servants of the Empire. So I can kind of see like where maybe Balin's not a Sith, but he's dealing in Sith stuff.
Mhm.
And then with the
What
Bane, oh, go
what
ahead.
if like some of this is like there's like a little bit of like wires crossed stuff is a little bit off. Like what if it's like, okay,
Mhm,
there's Tales of the bounty hunters,
mhm.
and it's Django and Ventress.
Ooh, that'd be
And then
cool.
there's Tales of the Jedi, and it's Balin and somebody else, or it's Tales of the Jedi and it's Balin and Maul, or Tales of the Sith and it's Balin and Maul. Like I wonder if like maybe there's a little bit of that going on, like where there's like a people have described the rumor stuff as like it's a game of telephone,
Oh God, yeah.
and maybe there's an element of like, oh, I heard this. I heard they're doing this. I heard there's a Tales series and it's Ventress and it's Maul, or it's an animated show and there's Ventress and there's Maul and there's Tales of the Sith, and like it's like a couple of these things, and whoever this person is that posted it, like maybe we're seeing it through their lens a little bit, like it's their interpretation of what they've been told.
That's possible. I mean, hey, Tales of the Sith, Maul and Balin as like not Sith. I mean, Maul was a Sith and not anymore, and Balin's just doing his own thing. I don't think he even sees himself as a dark sider,
Mhm.
even to some extent. I could see that. Although the Bane thing is interesting to me, but I've always wondered if they'll bring back Darth Bane because he was a Clone Wars. He did make a Clone Wars appearance all those years
Yeah,
ago.
I mean
So,
it would make sense. It would make sense.
and yeah, and I think Django and Ventress and Tales of the Bounty Hunters make sense because Django Fett gets Tim Morrison. I'm sure he's always happy to come back, and Ventress is a
Mhm.
bounty hunter. Um, so yeah, I could see that as well. It's interesting. Again, like I think you brought up the best point of it seems like a lot,
Mhm.
and they're dialing it back. Now, maybe animation doesn't really factor in as much as
No.
live action, unfortunately. Not I mean, both unfortunately and unfortunately, because like fortunately for us, because I love Star Wars animation. I think there's a lot of great Star Wars animation. I think some of the best storytelling in Star Wars animation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because that just means they don't care and they don't think it's going to affect the general audiences because general audiences don't watch animation. They should. There's a lot of great animation stuff out there.
Yeah.
But also it's like that is a lot. So
Mm.
part of me like wants to hope because I want to believe they're ramping up their animation because the live action's dialing down now.
Mhm.
But again, it's like that's a lot to announce.
Mhm.
I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Celebrations in a month.
Yep.
Thank God.
Very soon. Very soon. A month and a
But
bit. A month and a bit. Closer to 2 months.
I'm so excited, even though I'm not going, man. I
Yeah.
want to
I'm
go.
thrilled.
I know.
Can't wait.
But all right. I think we've done it. We've done our chat of the week. I actually am surprised by how many of my notes I was actually able to get through in terms of my topics. Um, Thank you, Dominic, for doing this. I'll give a behind the scenes fun fact though, folks.
Yeah.
We were originally planning on doing a review of the original Thrawn trilogy, but Dominic hasn't finished yet.
Yeah. This is an episode that we will do. We just have it's sort of in the works for a long time because I decided last summer to start rereading the Thrawn trilogy because I didn't remember it really well, and like all the stuff happening with Ahsoka and the Mandoverse. I was like, oh, I'd like to revisit this and just sort of have a sense of where
things could go, maybe.
Yeah, and where they're drawing some inspiration from.
Right.
And so I started with Heir to the Empire, and you reached out to me pretty quickly and said like, oh, why don't we should do an Heir to the Empire review. And I said like we could do that, but I think it'd be more fun to wait and do the entire Thrawn trilogy. And then I sort of put off starting Dark Force Rising for a little bit because I wanted to read other things. And then I read Dark Force Rising at the start of this year, and basically got to the end. I'd forgotten that cliffhanger and how good it was, and I'm like, all right, because my thing is to read one fiction book, one nonfiction book, like sort of to bounce back and forth.
That's fair.
And so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna read my nonfiction, and then instead of like waiting a few more to space it out and really sort of draw it out, my next fiction will just be The Last Command. And so I started reading The Last Command. I made a big dent in it last weekend. And we thought like, oh, maybe we can get it done in time for this while Matthew's away. And then I did very little reading last week and this most recent weekend over the last couple of days. So I'm about halfway through it. So maybe we'll get to it. Maybe next month, maybe after Celebration, something like somewhere in there we can do it.
I mean, if you just message me and I'll just let Matthew know, hey, Matthew, Dominic,
you're out for this week.
Take a break, buddy.
Yeah.
Take a break. I mean, no, he's done that with me. I've told him, hey, if you want a guest that's just you and this guest, I'm happy to take a break, and we actually have done that. So, I'm sure. But yeah, no. So we're hopefully to do that because I love the original Thrawn trilogy. It's
so good.
I'm
loving it so much. I've forgotten how good it is, and I really realized I only really remembered Heir to the Empire, like Dark Force Rising and The Last Command. I'm sort of saying they're like, did I read these? Did I actually read these? Because I've forgotten them, but I'm loving them, and it's great.
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk about that because we don't talk a lot about legend stuff as much. I mean, this podcast is on Canon, obviously, but it's like there's so much new canon stuff. It's kind of like you don't have time to go back and like what was Star Wars like in the 90s and the early 2000s before even the two Clone Wars? What was John Ostrander doing with the Clone Wars? So we're excited for that. But but this was still fun. This is a fun like like just a back and forth, and I love this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was great fun. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Of course, if you like us, you go follow us on Blue Sky. Oopsies. At the Ion Cannon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD at Blue Sky, Bisky Social. You can follow me at JID20234 and JID20234 on Blue Sky, Bisky Social. Of course, go follow. I didn't know that. Oh, that's right. If you're wondering what Plagueis66, friend of me. There is a great, and I'll give it to this after the show. There is this great Heir the Empire fan animation in 3D that someone is doing the whole trilogy of.
Cool.
And it's really cool. They're kind of mixing in some canon elements where they have Thrawn's theme and they do the Thrawn voice, the kind of a very Thrawn voice, so I'll send it to you after the thing. You should watch. It's great. Follow us on Blue Sky. Follow us on the Discord, SW Discord. We're having a movie night this Friday at 5:30 this time. If I said 6, I apologize. It's 5:30. We're trying to see if we can do these earlier so we can get Ben to watch the whole episode, the whole movie, because sometimes he has to leave and it's like, oh man, you're missing the ending, man.
When are we making Ben watch more Young Jedi Adventures? When
We'll do it soon, I promise. Well, maybe we'll. I'm trying to introduce him to more arty stuff. I want to
Mhm.
watch a 1970s Waterloo movie when eventually.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, do that. Um, Dominic, do you have anything to plug? Want to plug the Substack?
Yeah, you can follow my my Substack. It's dominicgjones.substack.com, or you can just search for Hoth Off the Press. That's the name of it. And you can follow me on the social medias at Dominic J25. Instagram is my social media drug of choice. So that's where I usually can be found. I have accounts on Blue Sky and Twitter, but I don't use them a ton. I mainly just read stuff over there. I don't post very much. Instagram, like I said, that's the place for me. And Substack, dominicgjones.substack.com. There's 2 posts weekly. Usually it's 2 Star Wars posts, but not always. I try and throw in some non-Star Wars every now and again. Doing rewatches of the Clone Wars and of Rebels.
Nice.
And so we go that you get kind of like a deep dive into the episode with some behind the scenes information, some like a review of the episode, some thoughts on how it fits into the larger themes and larger stories of Star Wars. They're a lot of fun to do, and then they get quite wordy, but in a way that I hope is entertaining to read. So they're called the series that I do over there. They're called Rebels Rewind and the Clone Wars Strikes Back. Just bringing back that name from my past.
Oh,
um,
I miss that. I miss
uh,
that so much.
I do too. So yeah, DominicGJones.substack.com.
I miss Life from Lothal too. That was a
I
fun
do
one.
too. That was such a good name. It was such a good. The show name and intro that I'm most proud of are Live from Lothal because they came together so nicely.
Oh, that's nostalgia for us. And I hope once I get some extra monies in my pocket, I will definitely subscribe to read the whole thing. I'm kind of broke right now, unfortunately, and I gotta tighten my belts. Um,
Oh, good.
but yeah, subscribe to that. Thank you, Dominic, again. And until next time, let's blow this thing and head home.